It is now time to introduce our main speaker for tonight, John.
My name is John James. I am an alcoholic. I am sober today by the grace of God and by the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm happy to be here. And I want to thank Jeff for playing calendar tag with me. I travel a lot, and so sometimes it takes a little while for us to put these things together. Just before the meeting tonight, the tape guy came over and asked my permission to tape, and I almost laughed. I've been sober a long time. Back when they used to tape with reel-to-reel. And I sponsor a guy I've been sponsoring this guy for 32 years. And he started Alcoholics Anonymous in Taiwan. And every Tuesday and every Friday for 2 years, he went to this little classroom that he had rented. And he sat there by himself and read the big book and played the 9-inch reel-to-reel tapes that we used to tape and send to him. I also want to say, God damn it, because the only requirement for membership in Alcoholics Anonymous is a desire to stop drinking. But if I cuss enough, then that keeps a lot of the really tight-assed secretaries from calling me to speak. I actually was speaking at a meeting not long ago, and there was some little prune sitting over there somewhere. He had a little notepad, and he was actually making check marks every time I cussed. Yeah, it was cool. Let's see, I better get sober here. I drank, I drank up a lifetime supply early. I got to Alcoholics Anonymous because I drank myself into a condition known as alcoholic paralysis. If you're new here tonight and you haven't had that experience, it's easy. If you want to have that experience, all you have to do is drink a lot. You may pass out, that is perfectly okay, but the minute you come to, you got to get right after it again. And you cannot eat anything except the stuff they sell in bars. And if you will just persist in that behavior for about 30, 35 days, one morning you will wake up and your mind will be sharp as a tack and you'll be saying, okay, let's get up and go out there and get them. And your body will just lay there in the bed and go, you go ahead, fool, but we're staying here. And so they came, the four of them in their little, had that little bed stretcher thing with the little fold-down legs, and they hauled my little paralyzed body off. And I was in the hospital. This was in Bozeman, Montana, where people drink with both hands and both feet, and that is normal behavior. And I was in the hospital for 6 days, and I would love to tell you that I had so many people come to visit me and so many people send flowers that I had to rent the room next door. That's what I would like to tell you. But the truth is I only had one visitor because during that last couple of years of my drinking, all the people that cared about me, I just kind of left them bleeding on the side of the road, you know what I mean? And the one visitor I had was the Budweiser distributor. I was in the saloon business. I was in the nightclub business. Well, let me back up. Among other things, I am a Vietnam combat veteran. And before I really understood what that meant, I used to have to find things to do to keep my adrenaline level up at a level where I was comfortable. And so myself and another Vietnam veteran decided we would start this nightclub in Bozeman, Montana, which we did. And a little later on, another Vietnam veteran came to town, and we found ourselves in the illegal substance transportation business. And we ran it like a military operation. But the Budweiser guy, I knew this guy for like 5 years. He was in my nightclub all the time. I was at parties at his house. And just to give you an idea as to how self-obsessed I was, I never noticed that this guy didn't drink. And so he came marching into my hospital room on August the 18th of 1974. And tucked underneath his right arm was a copy of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know now that he must have read over the chapter on working with others before he came to visit me, because he was just evil. I mean, he came in, he sat down, he didn't tell me that I didn't have willpower, he didn't tell me I was a moral leper, he didn't say anything about me. He just sat there and talked about him. And then he gets to the end and he says, yeah, and the people I loved the most are the people that I hurt the most. And I sat there and I thought, well, I laid there and I thought, why doesn't he just straddle my chest and drive a stake through my heart? And then he finished with, and today is your lucky day, because tonight is the one meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous a week in Bozeman, Montana. And if you don't have anything else to do, I'll be happy to take you to the meeting, right? And I have no earthly idea why I said okay, but I did. I said, okay. I got out of the hospital about 4 o'clock. I went home. I tried to duck the guy. And then about 7:30, he came to the house and knocked on the door, and I thought, well, shit. So I went with him to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And there were 10 men there. And it was in somebody's house in a little living room, and they'd scooted the little couches around so they have a little circle. And those 10 guys, I'm enormously grateful they decided to have their meeting instead of do something else, because if they had decided to do something else that night, I'd probably be dead. And these little 10 guys, old guys, like my age now, right? They saved my life. They explained stuff to me, and in such a simple way, even I couldn't argue with it. It was like, oh man, you have a disease. And I'm going, yeah. And they said, no. It is one of the allergic diseases. And that means that it meets or exceeds the 5 different criteria for allergic diseases. And they said, the thing that's interesting, though, is alcoholism, the allergy to alcohol, has a 6th thing. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, the 6th thing about the allergic disease of alcoholism is that the mind of the afflicted person continues to tell him that it is okay to participate in his allergy. Now, let me tell you what that means. I have a business partner, and he's been my business partner for 20 years, and he is allergic to peanuts. And I do not mean just a little bit. I mean if a peanut somehow manages to get in his body, we are talking 911. We're talking ambulance. We're talking anaphylactic shock. We're talking big deal. Not one time in the 20 years I've known this man has he ever said to me, I wonder if I can have just one peanut. Not one time have I had to run by and pull him away from the front door of 7-Eleven at 5 in the morning because he's trying to break in and buy peanuts. Not one time have I had to do that. They also told me that there was an answer to my disease. And they said, all you have to do is go to these little meetings, read this big, fat, silly blue book, follow the directions in it, get a relationship with God, clean up the wreckage of your past, and you can have happiness, joy, and freedom. That didn't sound too hard. At the end of the meeting, the guy says to me, listen, I can't go to the meeting tomorrow, but I'm going to give you a map in case you want to go. And I'm thinking, map? Bozeman? He said, no. The meeting is not in Bozeman. The meeting is in Livingston, Montana, 30 miles over the mountains. And I'm going, okay, give me the map. Sure, I'll go. But the next afternoon, about 4:30, I realized that a miracle was happening. It was 4:30, and I hadn't had anything to drink. So about 7 o'clock, I get in the car. I'm driving over the mountains to Livingston, Montana, where I went to my second meeting, huge meeting, 6 people. Held in a converted chicken coop that was attached to the side of a church. And these people were delighted to see me. How are you? Come in, sit down, have some coffee, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the meeting, they said, hey, would you like to go with us to the meeting tomorrow night? Well, by now I had almost 2 whole days sober, so I was starting to think, which has its good points and it has its bad points. So I say to this person, where is the meeting tomorrow night? And this is the night that I met my first old-timer. And I need to warn you new people about old-timers, because they are evil. They are totally evil through and through. The guy said, oh, the meeting tomorrow night is in Butte, Montana. And my mouth came open and said, that's 86 miles down the freeway. Now, here is how you can tell old-timers. They start every evil sentence just like President Reagan. They say, well, for those of you who do not know who President Reagan was, he was a guy that used to say, well. But old-timers are a lot more evil because they say, well, and then they drive a stake right through your heart. So I had just finished saying, that's 86 miles down the freeway, when I hear this voice, well, I've driven farther than that to get a drink. Have you? And I kind of turned around to see what smartass said that, and all I saw was the back of this old guy walking away, right? So I kind of argued with myself back and forth, and the next afternoon, about 5 o'clock, I'm in a caravan of 6 little cars driving 86 miles down the freeway to Butte, Montana. In November of that year, I found it necessary to leave Montana late at night under the cover of darkness. I had some issues with 2 agencies of the federal government, both of whom are lovingly referred to by their initials. And so I beat feet for Southern California. I accidentally fell into the old Culver City Clubhouse, which that used to be a cool place to go to meetings. It was right across the street from the back gate of the MGM studio. And the noon meetings it was like a joke. You would have people in there dressed like wild Indians. You'd have people, all these people from the studio would come across the street to go to the noon meeting. You're going to have a lot of people, if you're new, you're going to have a lot of people say, oh, get a sponsor and all that kind of stuff. And I think you should, but the truth is, I couldn't. I was too scared. And so it's like God took pity on me, and God made it rain every day in the month of November in 1974. Every day. Which means nothing to you, but it's important to me. Every day I would go to the noon meeting, and every day there would be a seat next to me that would be open somehow. And every day this same guy would come in and sit down in his seat. And he was in the landscaping business. And he never, ever, ever went to noon meetings unless it rained and he couldn't work. And for 30 days, I sat next to this guy, and he was an old Marine Corps combat veteran from World War II. And his life seemed to work. And there were just no big deals in this guy's life. I mean, there was nothing that threw this guy. He just kind of cruised through life, and he was happy. And he was the embodiment of my biggest fear. And my biggest fear is that no matter what I did, I would never, ever be able to just measure up as a normal kind of human being. And so after about 30 days, I kind of sneaked up on this guy, and out in the parking lot, and I said to him, listen, by the way, would you want to be my... Casey said no, I could say, what did you think I said, man? And he allowed us how he would love to be my sponsor if I was willing to do just two things. And I said, okay, what's that? And he said, well, you need to fulfill the conditions of sobriety, which means you have to work the steps, and I will show you how to do that. And then he said, the second thing is that before you take an action, you must call me and be willing to accept some simple directions from me from time to time. It didn't sound too hard until I thought about it. And with that second little thing, he had just covered everything else on earth other than the steps. Jesus. I mean, I carried a gun for the first 6 months I was sober. Some of you will, at some point in your sobriety, will have the wonderful opportunity to hear a woman speak named Claire S. And Claire is about, I don't know, maybe a year ahead of me. And she was an old gun moll back in the day. Well, back before there was a day. And the first social thing I went to in Alcoholics Anonymous was I went to her first birthday party in her little house. And I was scared to death to go there. And there was this little alcove that had a little, like bureau thing there. And there was just enough room for me to squeeze in between the wall and the side of this little piece of furniture where I could be safe. And this gun hit this wall. And this woman just turned around and looked at me, and she produced teeth from everywhere. And she came over and she gave me a hug, and she said, oh, you're my kind of guy. This is back in the day when this sponsor and I set out to work the steps, and this is back in the day when they used to say, you work the first 5 steps once, and you work the next 7 steps forever. And So that's what we did. And it was not that easy. I mean, I'd like to tell you it was easy as, falling off a log, but it wasn't, because if you go spend 17 months in combat zones, the one thing you're sure of is there is no God. So I would go to meetings and they would read the third step, and I would hear them say, made a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of something you don't believe exists, and even if it did, you wouldn't trust it. And so my sponsor sent me home with directions, because he kept saying to me, listen, son, you got to have a relationship with your very own God. Nothing else going to work. Our first speaker said that. By the way, that was very clear tonight. I loved it. Thank you for letting me have a meeting, because speaking at them don't count. He sent me home and he said, I want you to go home and write down God as you understand him. So by then I'm following directions, so I go home and I get out my little trusty legal pad, because that's a requirement for membership in AA. You have to have a legal pad and a bunch of pencils. And I'm busy writing down God as I understand him. And 2 days later, I go over to his house, and he sits down at the kitchen table, and I sit next to him, and he reads the first 2 paragraphs, and then over in the little margin, he writes over there, Catholic Church. And then he reads the next 3 little paragraphs, and he writes, generally accepted religious belief. And then he wads the whole thing up and throws it in the trash and hurt my feelings. I said, what are you doing? He said, you misunderstood. I asked you to go home and write down God as you understand him. I did not ask you to go home and write down God as everybody else understands him. And in the flash of an instant, with such clarity, I can't even tell you, it dawned on me I had never had an original thought about God in my life. Which is why God, other people's gods, never fit with me. And so then that encouraged me to go out and do a bunch of reading and make up my own mind, and to kind of come up with something that I could live with. And what I could live with is that God loves me, and I can prove it anytime I want. Because all I got to do is take a breath. And if it does not smell like bourbon, there's a very high probability that God loves me. The other thing that I could prove is that God is merciful and not just. Think about that. Justice for me would not be good. Mercy was very good. Okay? So now, all I got to do is make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of something that loves me and is merciful. Wow. And then, I have to write this inventory. The easiest step of the 12. I really hate to break your bubble if you're out there struggling with this one. The 4th step is so easy. All you have to do is go down, you sit home with a pencil and paper and write down all the bullshit you're telling people at meetings. And then what you really have to do is pray that your sponsor or whoever you're going to read this to can keep awake during your boring ass little story. I did not know this at the time. You know what I mean? We're talking big deal here. I'm just terrified, and I'm not going to read this inventory to anybody. But I had learned that it was about action here, not about thinking. So my head is saying, I am not going to read this inventory as I walked up the front steps. I'm not going to read this inventory as I knock on the door. I am not going to read this inventory as I lay it out and start reading this stupid-ass inventory. And now, years later, I sponsor all these people, and they come and, read their little inventory, and I always drink a pot of coffee before they come. Because otherwise it's... Once in a while I go, you did what with a chicken? I'm going to jump over a couple of steps, and I want to leap over here to make a list and then make your amends. And from reading the book, I realized this is really important. You got to hurry up and get these amends done. You know what I mean? Because in the book, it talks about the promises, and it talks about before we are halfway through. But if you read very carefully, it says before we're halfway through the 9th step. And so I divided my amends into 2 groups. I had the emotional amends. That's where I tore your heart out and tap danced on it. And then I had physical amends, and that's if I punched you in the nose or stole your money or whatever. And I know this, you know, at the time, it was like scary stuff. I mean, one of my financial amends is I owed the Liquor Control Board of the state of Montana $38,000, which does not sound like a great deal of money today. I mean, I drive cars that are worth more than that. But in 1975, $38,000 was the price of a house, okay? And I'm thinking, oh my God, where am I going to get this money? Where am I going to get this money? And I was saying this out loud over at a meeting. I said, God, where am I going to get all this money? And well, well, by then I'm sober long enough when I hear that, well, I said, well, God's got all the money. I turn around and say, hey, give me a little more on that, will you? He said, well, you got to read the book more careful. So that very night, now you got to understand by now I'm like a year and a half sober. I'm loving sober. I mean, when I wake up in the morning, it all starts out good. Number one, I wake up, I know where I'm at. This is a good thing. I accidentally know who I'm with. This is another good thing. I hadn't lost a car since I got sober. I hadn't wrecked a car since I got sober. I hadn't snatched anybody up by their little throat since I got sober. So everything is going along good. See, so I'm, oh. So I start rereading this goofy book. And I've worn out 3 of them now. And it's so simple. It's just so simple. It's like, we have a new employer. That's God. The job is stay sober, carry the message of hope to other suffering alcoholics. That's the job. Now, while you're busy doing that, you go out and sell your services to some person who thinks they're your employer. You know, you kind of humor them. And because they think you're working for you, they throw a bunch of money at you. And then you go pay your bills. And you're happy, joyous, and free. It's that simple. I have put Alcoholics Anonymous and its people first in my life for almost 34 years. I have done everything that business people will tell you you should not do. I live my life based on stay sober and carry the message of hope to other alcoholics. And I must tell you, it drives my accountant apeshit, and I don't care. It drives my attorneys nuts, and I don't care. It drives my banker apeshit, and I don't care. I just get up in the morning, I pray for knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry it out just today. This is a 1 day at a time program. That's the good news. The bad news is the longer you stay sober, the more you got to shrink that time period down to where it gets to the point where you got to live your life one moment at a time. I'm going to say something that I'm sure some of you old people will understand, and you new people, this may go over your head, and I'm sorry. Every projection is a planned disappointment planned by you. I better say that again. Every projection is a planned disappointment planned by you. It's like, oh, hell, gotta hurry. It's like, let's say you're in a little rubber raft and you're going down the river, kind of a thing. If you will just sit in the raft, man, it's a cool ride. You know, the current takes you around the rocks and you're just cruising down the river, it's all good. But you just get out of the moment and get scared and stick the oar in. I guarantee you a crash. Guarantee it. See, I mean, I can screw up a day by just doing something like I travel a lot, so I fly in and out of LAX all the time. So years ago, what I used to do is right around Palm Springs, the nutball pilot, who I hope is sober, he comes on, he says, well, we'll be landing in LA in about 40 minutes. And I used to do this. My head would leave, and it would go to, well, we'll be home in 40 minutes. Take me about 20 minutes to get my luggage. Take me about 30 minutes to drive home. Oh, I'll be home at so-and-so a time. I'm screwed. Any of you been to LAX lately? Have any of you ever seen your luggage come down the little thingy in 20 minutes? Even if it did come down in 20 minutes, have you ever got on the freeway and actually got home exactly in the time period you projected? No. But now, you see, it's my plan. And now I have to defend it, and I have to push it, and I have to force it. And I walk in a house, and my bride comes over. I say, get away from me. So now, I bought these, you can buy these little headphones that just block everything right out. So I still think the pilot is probably saying, we'll be landing in LAX in 40 minutes, but I don't hear him. Because I just want to land when we land. That's all I want to do. Okay? Now, let me hurry up. God damn, I talked too long. Okay. You know, my big secret was I would never be able to be just a normal kind of person. I am a normal kind of person. I actually have been married for 27 years to a babe. There are people in the room who know I am married to a babe. And just as recently as today, she's in Minnesota visiting her 94-year-old mother, but just as recently today, she told me she still loves me, which amazes me all the time. I have 2 children. Some of you know my children. I have a daughter. Who's 32 years old, and she is sober 16 years. And I have a son who's 26 years old, and he's sober 5. And that's really good for them. What's good for me is neither one of them have ever seen me drink. So when they see me, they come toward me. And they open their arms up, and I get to hug them and love them. And that is not my experience of a relationship with a father. And that has been given to me by you guys. See? I have come to rely on Alcoholics Anonymous so much. And I know so many people in AA all over the world. Where's my Dallas people? Rock, Dallas. I sponsor this young man who's, the woman that he has a daughter with is dying of cancer. And so he goes down to Dallas about every 3 weeks to visit his little daughter and to be of service and that kind of stuff. And the first time he went, man, I got in my big fat AA phone book and I looked up a couple of people I know sober in Dallas, and I call them on the phone and I say, listen, I'm going to have this guy call you. And every time he goes to Dallas, man, these AA people just kind of surround him, and they give him a little place to stay, and they make sure he gets transported wherever he needs to go, and they take him to meetings, and they don't want anything for it other than to love him, because they have discovered the big secret. And the big secret is all the goodies in love go to the lover. Love is the good feeling I get from giving. See? Jeff, thank you again. I've run out of time. I love you all. If you have any trouble hearing me say that, that's your trouble. Work a step.